Hello, Brobs. We're back with The Wandering Heir, A Christmas Story by Charles Reade. Hopefully I can finish chapter 10 and the book right here. We shall see. Her mistress never had a child, nor any expectation of one. She often confided to the witness her regret, and once, in particular, she came upstairs after dinner, crying, and said that brute below, meaning the defendant, had said he wished she might never have a child, and my lady said she wished she might but have a child to inherit, and she did not care if it was to die the next hour. Was at Ross with her lady after the separation, and had no knowledge of Lutwich, a shoemaker. Her lady wore braided shoes, but white damask never, all the time she knew her. No child ever visited her at Ross. Question: was there any child brought to my lady as her child? Answer: no, never was. She had no child. I can say no more. If they rack me to death. She swore that McKercher had called at her home in Holborn, and she had said to him, inter alia, think you if a child had been born to such an estate, they would not have had his birth registered. This witness was violent and argued the case too much, yet under cross-examination she gave unconsciously a picture of her fidelity and affection that made it hard to believe she could be the woman to lie her unhappy lady's son out of his estate if she believed he was her son. Counsel was cross-examining her to prove that Lady Altham's memory was impaired long before she died in 1729. In fact, when she came from Ross to Dublin, was she not troubled with a dead palsy? I cannot call it a dead palsy, sir. Did not that disorder deprive her of the use of her limbs? She lost her limbs by that disorder, but it came by degrees. When she came from Ross, she could go about with holding by one hand. When we first went to London, with one hand I could lead her about the room, and then with both hands, and then not at all. I was forced to put her in a chair and wheel her about, but her mind was clear. She kept her own accounts. That touching, though incidental picture of fidelity did not appear to strike the court, but it did Philippa Chester, and she felt sorely staggered and sick at heart. She was silent this evening, while James and Chester and McKercher discussed the evidence. Mr. Chester said her evidence was crushing, if true, but her manner was rather against her. I think you may perhaps get over her, said he. Are there many more? Plenty, said McKercher, but Heath is the only one I fear. She is an English woman and a Protestant. Bad luck to her. Martin Neef had seen Joan Landy with a child of her own at Dunmayne. Saw the same child afterwards at Dunmayne House. Saw him afterwards with my lord at Kinna. Has heard my lord say he would not for any money the boy should know Juggy Landy was his mother. Arthur Hurd was a barber's apprentice, and went out to shave Lord Altham at Carrickduff. When he had shaved him, Lord Altham said, come and live with me. You shall never want a piece of money in your pocket, a gun to shoot with, a horse to ride on, nor a lass to walk with. On this picture of domestic service, he ran away from his master without a scruple. He found a boy in my lord's house called Jemmy Annesley. He had a scarlet coat and a laced hat. Knew my lord to correct him once and say he had the thieving blood of the Landys in him. Grandfather used to steal the cauls out of his sheep and half thresh his corn and make the sheaves up. Witness used to go sometimes and see his friend at Ross. On these occasions, Master Annesley would send his duty to his mother. She was then in the service of a baker at Ross. Since Mr. Annesley's return had seen him and Mr. McKercher. McKercher asked him who was James Annesley's mother, and he told him it was Joan, or Juggy, Landy. He then reminded Mr. Annesley he had taken several duties from him to his mother and brought several blessings from his mother to him, and reminded him of a pair of stockings he brought him of his mother's knitting. And Mr. Annesley trembled and turned pale at this discourse. The claimant's case was now considered desperate. He himself seemed like a man awaking from a dream. Philippa was sick at heart. Oh, she moaned, will these dreadful witnesses never leave off? As for McKercher, he disappeared that night. Philippa went to the court next morning, pale and disturbed, all her alacrity gone. She went like one to execution, yet no entreaties could keep her away. No, she would know the worst. This day came a new costume. alderman king in his robes out of respect for the court, he disposed that Lady Altham lived in his house 9 months as his guest, a little before she left Ireland. She used to converse freely of her affairs, but never mentioned to him that she had a son. This closed the defendant's evidence. What now remained but the speeches of counsel and a verdict for the defendant? Not much, only to conquer the Napoleon of all attorneys, living or dead. McKercher reappeared and claimed, through his counsel, to prove perjury on the part of certain witnesses for the defense. The court allowed this with the usual limitation: he must state his points first and keep strictly within them. Claimant's counsel stated 4 points and then called to defeat the alibi aforesaid. Caesar Colclough, Esquire. He swore that he was at Wexford Spring Assizes, I don't know how to say it, 1715, was in court all day at Masterton's trial, did not sit by Lady Altham, and Mrs. Gifford did not believe they were in court, and Parson Doyle was not tried that day, but just 1 12-month after, and the Colclough was a juryman, and he, Colclough, was a juryman. On the same line, Thomas Higginson, collector of rents, swore Lady Altham went to those very assizes alone, and he called at Dunmain with money due. And Lady Altham... Oh, come on. Time is the essence here. There we go. Gave to him 2 glasses and white wine, and the second he wished her a happy delivery. Against Mrs. Heath they called an acquaintance of hers, one John Hussey, who swore that when the news of Mr. Annesley coming to claim his rights first reached London from Jamaica, and before the defendant's agents could get to her, she spoke of him to deponent as Lady Altham's son, and a much wronged man. William Stevens and William Houghton, persons intimate with Arthur Hurd, swore that this formidable witness for the defendant had told quite a different tale to them before the trial. Houghton gave some particulars of gossip. One Mrs. Simons had come into his place and told him Hurd had turned tail to Mr. Annesley, and the trial was going against him. Why, madam, said I heard Arthur Hurd express himself that Mr. Annesley was the heir. Press for the exact words of Hurd, he said, upon my oath and upon my salvation, upon everything. He said he did believe him to be the true heir of this estate the Earl of Anglesey now possesses. Both deponents swore that a remarkable saying, which was now ringing through every street in Dublin, came first out of Hurd's mouth, viz. Annesley is the right heir, if right might take place. Father John Ryan swore that Father Michael Downs had told him he was to get 200 lira for his evidence. I don't know if that's correct. Forgive me. And if he made a mistake, he must get absolution. This closed the plaintiff's evidence in reply. Then came an incident without a parallel. The judges had now before them the greatest mass of perjury ever delivered in Great Britain, and not being clear on which side the perjury predominated, they took unusual means to test the witnesses. They confronted them on the same table and took the examination into their own hands. Thus, whereas in an ordinary case there are 2 battles of evidence, in this immortal trial there were 4, and the last deserves a distinct heading. The duels on a table. William Elms, who had said Joan Laffin was a person not to be believed on her oath, was put on the table, and then Joan Laffin was ordered up. When she came on the table, she curtsied and said, "Your servant, Mr. Elms." The court. Woman, do you know that gentleman? Joan, yes, since I know anybody. Court, did you tell him at Dunmain you were nursing Lady Altham's child? Answer, I don't know, my lord. I never saw him to speak to at Dunmain but once. Elms, I was high constable, and I spoke to her several times at Dunmain when I went to collect the public money. Don't you remember that? Can you deny it? Joan, I protest I know nothing of it. The court, what was the nature of your service, Joan? I was chambermaid. Elms, she was laundry maid. Joan, ironically, very well, Mr. Elms. The court, having brought them to this issue, looked into the matter and found by the evidence of Heath and others she was chambermaid and not laundry maid. About Joan Landy's cabin, Joan said she only knew it while the child was there. It was then a handsome house with handsome things in it. The court to Elms. Pray, was there any such fine room as she describes? Elms. I never saw it. Without it was underground. I saw no furniture at all. There was a wall made up of soda and stones. Joan laughing. Oh, fie, Mr. Elms. I wonder you'll say so. Then she clasped her hands. By the holy evangelists, there was never a sod in the house. They continued again about the coach road, and this much abused witness, laughing, distinctly proved that the respectable Mr. Elms and Rolfe had lied and prevaricated about the coach road, and that it did not go where they said it did, but only to Joan Landy's cabin. The court to Joan laughing. Was it known by the neighbors that my lady had a son, and that the child you nursed was that son? Joan composedly. My lord, it is not known by 2,000 people, and everybody knows it if they will please to speak truth. Elms, I never heard of it, for one. The two priests were now put on the table, cheek by jowl. Father Downs denies that he ever rode and conversed with Father Ryan on any Sunday morning, but on Ryan reminding him of circumstance, he conceded the riding, but denied that he had ever conversed about this trial on a Sunday morning. Then the court made Ryan repeat to his face about the 200 whatever currency that is. Downs, does this man swear this? Court, he does. Downs, well, then I'll tell you, by virtue of my oath, I never was promised a farthing. And if you believe this, gentlemen, you may hang me, for he is a vile, drunken, licentious dog in the country. The next duel was between John Hussey and Mary Heath. They were put on the table together, and the court asked Mrs. Heath if Hussey had drank tea with her, since the account came from abroad about Mr. Annesley. Mrs. Heath, several times. Court, had you any conversation with him thereupon? Mrs. Heath, I have often said to him what a vile thing it was to take away the Earl's right. My lady never had a child, and I can't say so no more, if you rack me to death. Court, what is Mr. Hussey's character? Mrs. Heath, I can say no more than some said he was a gentleman's servant, and some said he lived by gaming. The court, repeat the words you say she said before you. Hussey, she told me the Duchess of Buckingham sent for her, and then she said, poor gentleman, I'm sorry for him from my heart, but no one has reason to know his affairs better than I do, for I lived long with Lady Altham, his mother. Mrs. Heath, by all that's good and great, I never said any such word. Then turning on Hussey, I never thought you were such a man. I've heard people say you were a gamester and lived in an odd way, but I would never believe it till now. I took your part and always said you behaved like a gentleman. Hussey, I am a gentleman and a man of family. Indeed, I heard you say it, and with all the regret and concern imaginable. Thus ended the greatest conflict of direct and heterogeneous evidence ever known in this country before or since, and if it does not interest my readers more than the rest of this story, let us have no more of the miserable cant about truth being superior to fiction, for truth has very few pearls to offer comparable to this great trial. The court adjourned, and Philippa and James Annesley both thanked God it was over, and agreed they would never have gone through it had they known what they were to endure. Sweetheart, said she to him, I have much need to see you gain your estates, for I have lost my youth. I was so young before this dreadful trial, and now they have made me old. They have shown me mankind too near. What? Is it really so that Christian men and women can stand up side by side and take the gospels of their Redeemer in hand, and one swear black and the other white of things they both do know, and all we, looking on amazed, can see naught in either face but truth and honesty, land and titles, quotha? What are they that men and women should fling away their souls? Why, if each of these false witnesses were to be Ireland's richest landowner and England's highest earl, still 'tis the devil that hath the best of the bargain. Oh, I am sick, sick! Shall England never come to this? Ever come to this? Then methinks 'twere time for honest men and women to run into the sea, and so to another world for truth. Having relieved her swelling soul, the noble girl laid her hand on James's shoulder and said pathetically, I have but one comfort in this wicked world, that he I love is an honest man. Yes, I am an honest man, too honest to trouble you any more if the jury shall say I am the woman's son. Oh, James, what words are these? Think you I care whose son may say you are? She made light of it, not knowing at the time the gloomy resolution James had come to. Yet, after all, now I think of it, she may have had some vague misgiving, for she said to Thomas Chester, almost crying, Uncle dear, if it goes against him, you will be very kind to him. For my sake, I will. Why should I not? But if you mean to give him my niece and her fortune all the same, why no. Not till he resigns litigation, that is a curse, and takes to some honest trade. Next day, Philippa had a terrible headache, but nothing would keep her out of court. 4 counsel for the defendant spoke in turn. Of these, Malone was one, and he spoke 4 hours with all the zeal and cogency of a great forensic reasoner. Often during a speech, poor Philippa said, Oh, will he never leave off? And when he did leave off, the claimant's case seemed prostrate. Nevertheless, next day, Counselor Marshall for the plaintiff spoke 1 hour only, but with such lucid order, such neatness, cogency, and power of condensation that he set the claimant's case on its legs again. He was followed by 3 more. I shall give 1 point of the many on which they countered, but I give it only because the judges, by some strange delusion, unaccountable in men so able, actually omitted it to say 1 word upon the point, though, to my mind, the case lay there. Prime Sergeant Malone cited, It is a rule well known that every case ought to be proved by the best testimony the nature of the thing will admit, and surely this Joan Landy was the very best witness that could have been produced on the side of the plaintiff. It is sworn for her by others that she took this child from its mother and nursed it for 15 months. Why, then, is not she produced? She is named on their list of witnesses, and the gentleman on the other side did, very early in the case, promise we should see her. But by and by they told us she was a weak woman and might be put off the thread of her story. But this was plainly not the real reason. The weakest man or woman can speak truth, and will probably, on their oath, say no other. It is a hardship for a weak mind that knows a fact not to be true, to color it or make it appear true. Their consciousness that Joan Landy was unwilling or unable to do this must have been their only reason for not producing her. Goodwill to the plaintiff she could not lack. She is by their account his wet nurse, and an Irish nurse, as Mr. McKercher told those who suspected this woman of being something more to the claimant, has a maternal affection, and is willing by all honest means to promote her nursling's welfare. Joan Landy knows better than any one whether she had a son by Lord Altham or not. Yet she is not called, and so, because Joan Landy knew too much about the sham to stand an examination, Joan Laffin, the pretended dry nurse, is put forward to give Joan Landy's evidence. Sergeant Marshall cited, in reply to the above, what we said to the gentleman was that Joan Landy had been tampered with, and we repeat it. On that account we did not examine her, but we offered her to the gentlemen on the other side, if they pleased to examine her, and they declined. Yet she is their witness. She plays in their case the part Lady Altham plays in ours. Their refusing to examine her is as if we should refuse to examine Lady Altham, were she alive. Yet we had Joan Landy in court for them, and they declined her. The last conflict was over, and the 3 judges summed up. Baron Dawson flimsily, the chief baron, and Baron Mountney with great pains, closeness, method, and impartiality on every point, but the conduct of the counsel in not calling Joan Landy. This, by some strange crook of the Celtic intellect, they all ignored. The jury retired. James Annesley waited a few minutes, and then, unable to bear it any longer, cast a look of agony at Philippa and left the court. McKercher followed him. Philippa sat in all tortures of suspense. While she sat twisting her hands, a line from McKercher was brought her. My dear young lady, keep your eye on him. He has bespoke a passage to Pennsylvania. She handed it to her uncle and clasped their hands. "No," said Thomas Chester, "there is no need for that. We must think of something." "What? The jury comes back so soon?" "Well, they are agreed then. I was afraid they never would. Better so, my child, than to go through this all again." "Silence!" Then the usual question was put to the jury, and their foreman delivered a verdict for the plaintiff. There was a loud huzza from the crowded court. Ladies waved their handkerchiefs, and Philippa gave a cry and was carried almost fainting from the court. She had not been at home many minutes when in rushed her lover, exalted in proportion to his recent despondence, and demanded her hand in marriage that very minute. What woman, however much in love, could put up with such conduct? She coquetted with her happiness directly, like any other daughter of Eve. Marriage! Time enough for that. At present she preferred to revel in her lover's triumph and not talk nonsense. So she said, however, then her lover informed her that the Irish estates and the title in perspective would not compensate him for what he had endured. McKercher had been fighting for land and honors, but he for her. Mr. Chester put in his word. "Come, niece, a bargain is a bargain. Prithee make me not a liar. I never broke faith when I was young, and shall I begin in my old age? I would do much to oblige you, uncle," says the young lady, smiling and coloring high at what she saw coming. In ran McKercher, boiling over to say he had arranged bonfires, bells, and a torchlight procession. "The marriage first," said Annesley, "or none of your public shows for me." Finding him as obstinate as a mule, the pliable McKercher shifted his helm, got a parson, and distinguished witnesses all in an hour, and the deed of settlement was produced by Chester, and signed, sealed, and witnessed, and the marriage solemnized in private, as usual among the great. And Matthews rode home to prepare his house to receive the bride and bridegroom. At night, McKercher, in all his glory, arranged the torchlight procession, with all the bells arranging and bonfires blazing on the neighboring heights. It was a splendid cavalcade, both of men and women, for the young lord, as they called him now, was the darling of the hour, and all the quality clustered round him. Then James must show his darling Philippa all the places where he had suffered privation and misery. They made a progress. They went in triumph to Frapper Lane and others of the places, to Smithfield, where he had held horses, and to Ormond Quay. One incident occurred worth mentioning. They passed John Purcell's door, and the old man stood in the doorway to see the show, as all the neighbors did. Annesley caught sight of him, instantly dismounted, and fairly flung his arms round the old man's neck and kissed him on both cheeks. The old man kissed him in turn and sobbed a word or two, but when James looked for his mammy, he shook his head. She was gone from the joys and troubles of the world, and this is the sorest wound to gentle hearts, that those who are kindest to us in adversity cannot stay below to share our prosperity. The crowd huzzaed louder than ever when the young lord kissed the humble, sturdy benefactor of his youth, and then the bright cavalcade resumed its march. They took that sore-tried but now triumphant pair a mile out of Dublin. Then they broke into two companies. The larger rode back to drink their healths in Dublin. The smaller rode with them to Captain Matthews, waving torches and hurrahing lustily at times. He kept them all and their horses that night with Irish hospitality. How sweet is pleasure after pain! Such a day as this comes to few, and to the happiest but once in a life, and all the past trouble, mortification, doubt, and suspense made it sweeter still. Indeed, scarcely credible it was such rapture. I could tell more about the wandering heir, but fiction is not history, and I claim my rights. Even the Iliad is but a slice out of Troy's siege. So surely I may take these marvelous passages of an eventful life, then drop the curtain on the doubtful future. Whether or not he holds his estates and gets his title from the peers, he has been poor and now is well-to-do, a slave and now is free, alone in the world and now blessed with Philippa. There lies his best chance of enduring happiness when all is done. For few things in this world keep their high flavor. Custom blunts them so. Wealth palls by habit. Titles cease to ring in sated ears. French dishes pall the appetite in time. Power and reputation have no spells against satiety. Only pure conjugal love seems never old, nor stale, but ever sweet. If it declines in passion, it gains in affection. It multiplieth joy, it divideth sorrow. And here, in this sorry world, is this thing likest heaven. Fini. Note, as this story is historical, many real names figure in it. Should the same name still exist, please do not connect their present owners with my characters, who died a century ago. Example, the Earl of Anglesey, who plays so ill a part in these pages, was an Annesley, and no relation whatever to the chivalrous Pagets. The old earldom expired in 1771. In 1815, Parliament bestowed this title on one of the heroes of Waterloo, by whose direct descendant it is held, Charles Reade. And there was no connection to Christmas unless there's some secret story here. And look at this, Hunter, Rose and Co. Publications. Paul, Miss Finch. Miss or Mrs. The New Magdalene. All by Wilkie Collins. By Charles Reade, Terrible Temptation. A Simpleton, a Wandering Heir, a Christmas Story. No, it isn't. It isn't. Tisn't. All right. That's all. She complete. She done. Goodbye, bruv. Goodbye. I gotta go eat some lunch. Good boy.